They fired me the same week I closed the biggest deal this company had ever seen. No warning, no thanks, just a quiet calendar invite titled Discussion, the kind of corporate euphemism you learn to dread after years in the trenches. I wasn't just another mid-tier account guy. My name is Logan. I'd been with the firm for 13 years. I knew the clients, I understood the process, and, more than anything, I understood what we were selling better than the people who wrote the brochures. This deal had taken me 11 months. 11 months of chasing, negotiating, building trust, looping in legal, reshaping proposals. Late nights, missed weekends, 3 separate rewrites of the implementation model. And then finally, we got the signature. 4 days later, I got the termination notice. They said it was restructuring, but let me back up because context matters. When I joined the firm, we were maybe 30 people in a co-working space, surviving quarter to quarter. I remember making cold calls in the hallway because we didn't have enough rooms. I remember hauling folding chairs to conferences, pitching to rooms that barely listened. I wasn't above it. None of us were. Over time, we found traction, landed a few regional accounts, then we cracked into healthcare, and that changed everything. I worked on the early accounts personally, built the playbooks we still use today. By year 5, I wasn't just closing deals. I was mentoring the new hires, mapping entire verticals, and presenting at leadership summits. I wasn't chasing praise. I just wanted the machine to work better. And it did. But things shifted last year. The old CEO retired. A quiet exit. No drama. In came a new one. Sharp suit. Background in capital efficiency. She brought in a couple of strategy people with slide decks and polished resumes. I remember the first all hands. There was a lot of talk about repositioning, scalability, horizontal synergy. I kept my head down. The market was tough. Everyone was tightening budgets, watching headcount. I understood the pressure, but something about her presence made the air colder. You could feel it in meetings, people choosing words more carefully. Less pushback, more alignment. The culture started to fray around the edges. Meanwhile, I was buried in what would become the biggest contract we'd ever signed. A Fortune 100 logistics client, massive footprint, complex needs, long buying cycle. They'd been burned before, skeptical of agencies, but I'd built a bridge over months of quiet effort. I never overpromised. Just listened, built trust, made good on every small ask. That's what most people get wrong. They chase the close instead of investing in the rhythm. But I played the long game, and it paid off. The deal closed on a Monday morning. I remember the ping from legal when the final doc came through. I just sat back in my chair and exhaled. 11 months. We'd beat out 3 other firms. I walked into the boardroom that afternoon with a printed copy and handed it to our director of client services. He didn't even look up, just nodded and said, "Nice." That's when I knew. Something was off. I didn't expect a parade, but I expected something, recognition, context. Instead, I got silence. 3 days later, that discussion invite hit my calendar. 30 minutes, Friday morning. The moment I stepped into the room, I saw it. The new VP of Operations was there. So was a junior from HR who barely knew my name. The VP started talking immediately. As you know, we're undergoing some necessary realignments. This isn't performance-based. We deeply value your contribution, but due to strategic shifts, you know the script. They never make eye contact when they say it. I didn't interrupt. I just watched her, calm. I let her finish every word. Then I asked one question. "Did you know I just closed a logistics deal?" She blinked, looked at HR, looked back. "Yes, of course. and it's a remarkable achievement, but unfortunately, I didn't hear the rest, not because I was angry, but because I had already made a decision. They didn't fire me because of budget cuts. They fired me because I didn't fit the new image. I wasn't flashy. I didn't talk in buzzwords. I wasn't on Slack at midnight posting GIFs in the Culture Channel. I worked. I delivered. I outperformed. And I didn't play politics. That scared them. They wanted control, predictability, people who would align, nod, and obey. I was none of that, and so they let me go. I didn't argue. I walked out with everything I needed, because what they didn't know was this: that logistics client didn't sign the deal because of our brand. They signed because of me, because I spent nearly a year building that relationship, because I sat through every procurement meeting, translated every technical requirement, walked them through our architecture step by step, and the ink wasn't even dry before the client called me. "Logan," he said, "we heard you're not with the firm anymore. Is that true?" I paused. "Yeah, just got the news." There was silence on the other end. Then, "Well, that complicates things." He didn't say much more, just that he'd be in touch. But I knew what he meant. Because when you become the reason someone trusts a company, and then that company shows you the door, they don't just lose you, they lose trust. And once trust leaves the room, it's hard to get back. The call ended without specifics, but it stayed with me. The client didn't just sound surprised, they sounded unsettled. Like something that shouldn't have happened just did. And that's when it clicked. I wasn't the only one blindsided. They'd signed a multi-year agreement, trusting that the person who'd built their entire solution would stay on board. That trust had weight, and the firm had just thrown it away like a piece of outdated software. I didn't reach out again, didn't try to steer anything. That wasn't my style. I respected their space, but over the next few days, I started to notice something. First came the LinkedIn views, the quiet digital footsteps from decision-makers in the logistics team. Then, one of their regional directors connected with me directly. No message, just the connection. By the end of the week, I got another call. This time, it wasn't polite. "Logan, this is getting ridiculous. They're sending in someone new who doesn't understand anything we talked about. None of the technical mapping, none of the delivery flow, just jargon. Like they skimmed a deck and showed up to pretend." I let him vent. Then I asked, "What do you want me to do?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I didn't expect. "You ever think about consulting?" I hadn't, not seriously. I'd spent my whole adult life within the walls of a company. I knew the rhythm, the ladder, the safety, but in that moment something shifted. I realized I had built more than just one client relationship. Over the years, I had built something bigger, reputation. And that's not something they can take from you, no matter how quickly they terminate your contract. I told him I'd think about it. And I did. That weekend, I sat down with a notebook, no laptop, no distractions, just questions. What did I know how to do that actually mattered? What problems could I solve better than most? What would I do if I didn't need a job title to prove my value? By Sunday evening, I had 3 pages of answers. So, I made a call. Not to a lawyer, not to an accountant. I called someone I trusted. Someone who had made the jump years ago and never looked back. He listened carefully. Then he said, "Logan, you already have the thing most people spend years building: credibility. You just have to trust that it still counts outside the walls of a company." That stuck with me. On Monday, I registered my own consulting business. No fancy name, just mine, clean and clear. By Thursday, the logistics client reached back out. They didn't ask. They told me. We're pausing the rollout until we figure out a better way forward. Their new guy doesn't understand our business. You do." And just like that, I had my first contract. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't some overnight revenge arc. It was just earned. They paid me fairly, not generously, not under the table, just what it was worth. We set the scope, put it in writing, and started clean. Meanwhile, word spread quietly. People who had worked with me before started reaching out. "Hey, heard you're doing your own thing now. We've got a project coming up. Any chance you'd be open to a short-term engagement?" These weren't friends doing favors. These were people who had seen the work, who remembered the results, and who were tired of dealing with bloated firms that treated them like numbers. Within 6 weeks, I had 4 clients. None of them massive, but solid. And more importantly, mine. I didn't have to ask permission to run my day. I didn't have to loop in someone 3 layers above me to approve a change. I could just solve the problem. And the firm? I kept tabs. Not obsessively, just enough to understand how the story continued without me. Turns out, things weren't going as smoothly as they'd hoped. The logistics client had scaled back their engagement. Quietly, no drama. Just a phased slowdown that bled into financials. I heard through one of the sales guys, someone who stayed behind, that the board had started asking questions. Why did we lose momentum right after closing the biggest deal in our history? No one had a good answer, and still, I stayed quiet, because I wasn't interested in proving a point. I was building something better. What struck me most during those months wasn't just that I could work independently. It was how little people like me think they can. We're trained to stay inside systems, to wait our turn, to believe that titles are what give us permission to make decisions. But once that illusion breaks, something powerful happens. You start making decisions on your own terms. I remember one morning, about 2 months in, I woke up to 4 emails from 3 different time zones. All people who needed something from me, not because they had leverage, but because they trusted I'd deliver. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel replaceable. I felt respected. Not in the corporate sense of empty recognition plaques or performance review compliments, but in the real sense, where someone stakes a budget, a timeline, a result on your name. That's what they never understood. When they let me go, they thought they were cutting costs, simplifying, clearing the way for their shiny new strategy. What they actually did was remove the one person who knew how to translate chaos into action. And the people who mattered? They noticed. 3 months after they fired me, I received a calendar invite from a name I hadn't seen in a while. It was from someone at the firm, an executive assistant. The subject line read, "Exploratory Discussion, Client Relationship Review." I sat back and stared at the screen. I knew what it meant, even if they didn't say it outright. The contract I landed had become unstable. Not hostile, not dramatic, just disengaged. The kind of silence companies dread, especially after making a big announcement to investors. I didn't accept the invite right away. I thought about it. Not out of ego, but clarity. I wasn't interested in rehashing the past. I had moved on, built my own base, and finally felt like my work aligned with who I was. Still, curiosity won. I replied politely and offered a single 30-minute slot 2 weeks out. No rush. When the day arrived, I logged in a few minutes early, just to see. The room filled up quickly. 2 directors I'd worked with, someone from finance, and then him, the one who fired me. The same polished tone, same sharp suit. But this time, he looked tired. Not physically, strategically. He started with a diplomatic nod. "Logan, thanks for making time. We know you're busy." I returned the courtesy. "Of course. You wanted to talk about the client?" They didn't waste time. They walked me through a sanitized version of the fallout. Delays, missed expectations, technical misalignment. Apparently, the new team hadn't grasped the nuances, and the client wasn't feeling heard. They didn't say it, but it was clear. The contract was slipping through their fingers. After 10 minutes of corporate small talk, the real question came out. "Would you be open to returning in a senior advisory capacity? We'd like to explore re-engagement options, if that's something you'd consider." I let the silence breathe. Then I said, "I appreciate the outreach, but I'm not looking to come back." That caught them off guard. For a moment, no one spoke. So I added, calmly, "I'm working with the client directly now, independently. We have an agreement in place. They were clear about what they needed, and I've been delivering it." It was the truth, no posturing, just a statement of fact. The director nodded. "That aligns with what we've been hearing. They've mentioned you several times." What happened next wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no awkward justifications, just quiet recognition. They knew they'd made a call, and it had consequences. The meeting ended professionally. They thanked me, said they'd be in touch if opportunities emerged in the future. I closed the tab and exhaled. Not because I'd won anything, but because I finally felt done. There was a time, not long ago, when I would have jumped at that meeting, when I'd have dressed it up in hope and played the long game to win their approval back. But not now. I didn't need their titles to validate my work. I had clients who trusted me, projects that energized me, and control over my own calendar. And with that distance came perspective. I remembered all the late nights I'd spent trying to hold things together inside that company, the political dances, the extra decks, the unspoken fear that if I slipped once, I'd be replaced. And now, here I was, replaced, and better for it. That year, I onboarded 6 more clients. Not because I advertised, not because I chased, but because people talked. Results speak. People remember who actually solves problems. The logistics client extended their contract twice, quietly phased out their engagement with the firm, and started referring me to others, industry partners, colleagues, even one of their competitors. It wasn't explosive growth. I didn't become some overnight sensation, but I built something stable, clean, mine. There were hard days, sure, uncertainty, burnout creeping in when I didn't set boundaries, but it was my responsibility now. My name on every document, my values driving every choice. And every once in a while, when someone asks why I left the firm, I smile and say, "I didn't. They let me go." Right after I brought in the biggest win they'd ever had. Then I let the silence do the rest. Because here's what they'll never understand. When you treat people like tools, you assume they're interchangeable. But some of us were never tools to begin with. We were the blueprint, the system behind the system, the reason the work actually moved forward. And when you throw that away, when you let someone go for the sake of optics or ego, you don't just lose a person. You lose what they made possible. So yes, they fired me. But the moment they did, they handed me back everything I had given away over the years. Control, direction, and my name. And what came next, that was entirely mine.